I gave birth on a freezing winter afternoon in the suburbs of Chicago, after 18 hours of exhausting labor so intense I could no longer feel the contractions. My body felt like it was being crushed from the inside out, and my mind clung to only one thought. My daughter was about to be born. Outside, snow blanketed everything, while inside the delivery room only a shattered yellow light flickered from the ceiling, and the sound of my own hoarse breathing filled the air. I had imagined that after all the pain, the moment my daughter let out her first cry would be the most beautiful moment of my life. I had imagined my husband, Daniel, would hold my hand, look at our child, and smile like we had dreamed about, but I was wrong. So terribly wrong. When the nurse placed the red-faced baby in my arms, I hadn't even held her tightly yet, when Daniel stepped forward and snatched a stack of papers from the nurse's hands. The nurse, an older woman with deep-set eyes and a cold face, flinched and stepped back. Daniel didn't look at me, didn't ask for my opinion, just bowed his head, picked up a pen, and began writing. "Her name will be Evelyn, after my mother," he said, his tone indifferent, as if he were giving orders to an employee, not speaking to the woman who had just given birth to his child. I struggled to sit up, my heart pounding like it was about to break free from my chest. "We agreed, remember? Her name is Lena, Daniel. Did you forget?" He turned to me, his eyes cold as steel. "You don't get to decide," Daniel said, enunciating each word. "She's my child, and my mother picked that name before you even knew you were pregnant." I was nearly paralyzed. The pain from childbirth still throbbed, but it was nothing compared to the feeling of betrayal from my own husband. I gently squeezed my daughter's tiny hand, the baby still sleeping peacefully, unaware of how cruel the world could be. The older nurse, the only other person in the room besides Daniel and me, stepped closer. She leaned in and whispered something that made it hard for me to breathe. "Do you want me to tell him the truth?" I turned to her, eyes wide. "What truth?" I asked, my voice shaking with fear. But the nurse only shook her head slightly and glanced at Daniel, who was still hunched over writing, completely unaware that the atmosphere in the room had drastically changed. "Not now. But you should know. This isn't as simple as you think," she said quickly, her voice low and firm like a rock. I felt like my heart dropped into a pit. The name Evelyn on the paper, Daniel's icy expression, the nurse's knowing look, all of it stirred up a nameless dread inside me. I stammered, "I don't understand. What are you talking about?" The nurse gently squeezed my hand, as if to calm me. "Trust me. Don't let him take control of everything. You need to know the truth before it's too late." Daniel looked up, slightly frowning. "What are you two whispering about?" I pressed my lips together, trying to stay calm. "I don't agree with that name. We chose it together. I don't give you permission to change it." He let out a short laugh. "Don't give permission?" Daniel set the pen down, stepped right up to me, and looked down like I was ruining some grand ceremony of his. "Jessica, you just gave birth. You're tired, you're not thinking clearly. It's best if you don't make a fuss. I'll handle everything." I looked at him, part of me wanting to scream, to rip apart all the layers of fake calm he wore. But I didn't even know exactly what I was up against. I only knew one thing. Something was very wrong, and I couldn't let it go on. I turned to the nurse. "I need to know. Now." She nodded, her eyes serious. "All right, but you have to be prepared. Because once you know, there's no going back." I held my daughter tighter. Despite the fear, I gave a slight nod. "Tell me." Back when I was 26, I met Daniel after just landing a job as assistant to the director at a small tech company in St. Paul, Minnesota. Daniel was a software engineer, calm, smart, and with a polished look that didn't go unnoticed by others in the company. We met during a team meeting when he accidentally picked up my laptop. After a few hallway and cafeteria chats, Daniel asked me out for coffee. We dated for over a year before he proposed. I still remember the moment he knelt down in a garden of blazing red maple trees on a crisp autumn day, offering me a small but delicate ring. I thought I was the luckiest woman in the world. Until I met Patricia, his mother. Patricia was over 60, dressed elegantly, always wearing classic pearl necklaces and never seen without her bold red lipstick. She didn't yell at me or say anything outright rude. Patricia hurt with suffocating politeness, as if every word was carefully chosen to make me feel small and unworthy. At our first meeting, she looked me up and down with a distant expression and asked, "You went to a state university? I thought Daniel would choose someone from the Ivy League." I gave a stiff smile, but before I could respond, she turned to Daniel, as if I didn't exist. "Well, I suppose my son's taste is a bit more modest than I expected." Daniel just laughed it off and said nothing. I thought it was just a joke. But as time went on, I realized it wasn't. When we started planning the wedding, Patricia suggested changing the main color from blue to cream because blue makes you look washed out. She complained about the venue being not upscale enough and even asked if I could lose a few pounds to look better in the dress. I tried to be patient for Daniel's sake. He always said, "My mom is strict, but she means well." I believed him. I wanted to believe that once she got to know me, things would change. But that never happened. When I got pregnant, everything escalated. Patricia seemed to think that me carrying her grandchild gave her the right to control every aspect of my life. "Jessica, you really shouldn't eat cheese like that. It'll affect the baby's intelligence." "Which hospital are you planning to deliver at?" "The one where Daniel was born is the best." "I've already checked." "Don't listen to the doctors. They just say things to sound smart." When I was pregnant with Daniel, I only ate potatoes and eggs and still gave birth to a perfect baby. I tried to explain that I had my own doctor and a clear healthcare plan, but each time Daniel would sigh and brush it off. "Don't stress. She just cares about you and the baby." But I knew. She didn't care about me. She just wanted to control everything, even the baby who hadn't been born yet. I remember once she took me shopping for baby clothes but then picked out everything herself, all pink, all printed with the name Evelyn, her name. When I gently reminded her that we hadn't decided on a name yet, she just smiled. "No need to discuss it. That name is a legacy. I already talked to Daniel." I was stunned. Daniel had never mentioned that. When I asked him about it that night, he just said, "Yeah, she brought it up, but I figured, come on, it makes her happy. What's the harm?" That's when I started to feel afraid, not of Patricia, but of Daniel. Afraid of his silence, his constant willingness to give in, making me feel like a stranger in my own life. I used to believe that being a daughter-in-law meant learning how to compromise, but I didn't think it meant giving up my own voice or sacrificing my daughter's identity just to please my mother-in-law. Now, sitting on the hospital bed with my baby in my arms, I recalled it all like a slow-motion film. All the times I stayed quiet, all the times I gave in. It all led to the moment Daniel signed Evelyn on the birth certificate without even asking me. And now, when the nurse whispered, "Do you want me to tell him the truth?" I knew this wasn't just about naming a child. This was a truth I wasn't ready to face, but one I could no longer avoid. I looked at her. Her eyes seemed to see through something, and I gave a small nod. I got pregnant one chilly March morning in Minnesota, when the wind slipped through the windows like a reminder that life was about to turn a new page. 2 red lines appeared on the test and my heart raced. I was both overjoyed and terrified. Happy because this was our first child. Terrified because I knew his mother wouldn't leave us in peace. Just 3 days after we shared the news, Patricia called at 7 in the morning while I was still in bed, aching after a sleepless night. She didn't ask how I felt, didn't congratulate me. Instead, her voice was clear and commanding. "Jessica, I've sent you a list of foods to avoid, a reliable nutritionist, and the best hospital in the area. Don't follow nonsense from the internet. I know what's best for the baby." Before I could respond, she hung up. I told Daniel, hoping he'd understand how I felt, being pregnant for the first time, needing support more than control, but he just shrugged. "That's just how my mom is, you know that. She's only trying to help." I didn't know how to respond. Help? How is it help when I wasn't allowed to decide anything for myself? From then on, Patricia sent weekly emails, sometimes 10 pages long, filled with detailed notes about diet, ultrasound schedules, even playlists of classical music, to develop the baby's brain. She even bought a music player and sent it to our house, insisting I play it for 2 hours a day. I chose an OBGYN at a private clinic I trusted, someone who had cared for me even before I got married. But when Patricia found out, she was furious. She wanted me to go to St. Briar Hospital, where she volunteered and where Daniel was born. I've already made an appointment for you, next Friday. Don't embarrass me. When I pushed back and said I wanted to stick with my doctor because I felt safe, Daniel looked at me like I was causing trouble. You're making a big deal out of nothing. It's just a hospital. I started to feel lost in my own life. Every morning, I woke up to a long list of shoulds and should-nots dictated by Patricia. Meals had to be precise in portion and timing. Every evening, I had to send her my meal plan. One time, I had pancakes with syrup, and she called in the middle of the night to scold me. Jessica, sugar will slow the baby's brain development. Do you want it to fall behind its peers? Daniel sat beside me, and instead of standing up for me, he blamed me. You're stressing my mom out. Don't make her worry so much. I broke down in tears. Not over pancakes, but from the helplessness that was slowly eating away at my heart. By the second trimester, I had severe morning sickness. I felt exhausted, my taste changed, and I couldn't stand the smell of the food Patricia sent. I tried to eat more gently, adjusting to what my body could handle. That's when Patricia accused me of ruining the baby's future. She started coming over every weekend, bringing baskets of food, a blood pressure monitor, and charts tracking fetal development. Once, I woke up to find her rummaging through our kitchen, throwing out anything that didn't meet her standards. Daniel stood there with a coffee mug, saying nothing. I nearly shouted, "This is my home. How can you let your mom do this?" He just sighed and set his mug down. I'm tired of all this drama, Jessica. Do you want everything to be a mess? Drama? When I was carrying a tiny life inside me, living by someone else's rules, without even basic support from the man I married, I started journaling just to hold on to a piece of myself, because I was scared that someday I wouldn't recognize who I was anymore. The breaking point came when Patricia brought over a leather-bound notebook with a list of names she had already picked out, all starting with E, with Evelyn written in bold at the top. This is a family tradition. I've already decided. Daniel agrees, right, son? I looked at Daniel, hoping he'd shake his head, but he stayed silent, then gave a small nod. I don't know how I held myself back from screaming right then. I just got up, held my belly, walked to the bedroom, and closed the door. For the first time, I realized that the child growing inside me wasn't just mine. It was being treated like a piece of legacy. Patricia wanted to mold in her own image, and Daniel was no longer my partner. I just didn't know yet. Things were only beginning to fall apart. I was admitted to the hospital on a gloomy morning in early October, when golden leaves had begun to fall across the porch and the wind carried a chill that signaled winter was near. Labor started at 3 a.m, gentle at first, like a soft squeeze, then quickly turned into violent contractions that left me unable to stand. Daniel drove me to the hospital, but didn't say a word the entire ride. He was on the phone the whole time. Of course, with his mother, I remember his voice clearly, steady and unhurried. Mom, we're on our way. No, I've got the hospital bag. Yes, your name is already on the list, just like you said. His mother's name? At that moment, I was in too much pain to think straight. But deep down, a gnawing sense of unease began to rise. While I lay on the hospital bed, my back drenched in sweat, Daniel sat in a chair, eyes glued to his phone screen. He scrolled through the news, texted, and occasionally chuckled at someone on the other end. He didn't hold my hand once, didn't ask if I was okay. Even the nurse frowned and gave him sideways glances. I screamed through a contraction, my whole body trembling from the pain, and all he said was, "Don't be so loud. You're making everyone tense." When the baby let out her first cry, I thought I would burst into tears from emotion, but instead I felt a cold emptiness. I hadn't even held her for a full minute before Daniel stepped up, brushed my hand aside, and snatched the birth certificate papers from the nurse as if he were the only one with any right. "She'll be named after my mother." "Evelyn Jane," Daniel said, without even looking at me. I was confused. We agreed on another name. Lena Grace. We both agreed, don't you remember? He looked at me like I was a stranger. "I didn't forget. I changed my mind, and you don't have the right to object." I was stunned. After 18 hours of labor, my body drained, my mind a mess, and now the man I'd shared my life with was trying to erase my voice completely. The nurse standing nearby, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and sharp eyes, suddenly leaned in and whispered, soft as wind brushing my ear, "Do you want me to tell him the truth?" I turned to her, trying to steady myself. "What truth?" I whispered, my breath short and uneven. She looked at Daniel, then back at me, her eyes filled with determination. "Not yet. But you need to know. And you need to know now." I nodded. I didn't know what I was facing, but I could feel it was something big. I looked at Daniel. "You don't have the right to change her name without me." He chuckled. "I already did. And if you don't want to make this harder, it's best to stay quiet." I gripped the blanket tightly, trying to stay calm, but the nurse didn't stay silent. She stepped forward and firmly pulled the papers from Daniel's hands. "You don't get to treat her like this," she said, her voice cold as steel. "And if you think I don't know what you did with the insurance paperwork, you're mistaken." Daniel froze. "What are you talking about?" I looked up at the nurse. "Insurance paperwork? What's going on?" She sighed. "I checked when you were admitted. You're not listed on the parental insurance file. Only one parent is listed as legal guardian, and that's Daniel. You're not legally recognized as the mother." I went numb. My blood felt like it stopped flowing. "That can't be. I'm her biological mother." Daniel turned away, fists clenched. "You don't understand." "Then explain," I said, my voice trembling. "What did you do?" Daniel took a deep breath, trying to keep his composure. "I just arranged things to be safe. I needed to make sure that if anything happened, custody would go to someone responsible." "You're saying I'm not responsible enough for my own child. You wouldn't even listen to my mother." That's when it hit me. Everything. From the name Evelyn, to the diet, the hospital, and now the legal documents, were all pieces of a plan that Daniel and his mother had carefully laid out. A plan to push me out of my own child's life. The nurse stood tall, arms crossed. "She has the right to know. And I'll make sure the records are corrected. Today." Daniel stepped back, his expression shifting from anger to worry. I held my baby tighter, tears streaming down, not from pain, but from betrayal. I didn't know exactly what awaited me beyond that hospital door. But I knew one thing. I would not stay silent another second. I never imagined I'd be sitting in a hospital room, holding my newborn daughter, questioning whether the man I'd shared 3 years of marriage with was plotting to take away my right to be a mother. The nurse, Carol, still stood there, her expression firm like someone who had witnessed too many broken families through the lens of her scrubs. She placed a hand on my shoulder, light but steady. "We need to review all your records, Jessica, and I'll personally speak with the administration." Daniel stood frozen, his shoulders trembling slightly, eyes darting between me and Carol. He no longer looked composed, no longer in control. I saw the fear in his eyes, and it sent a chill through me. "What did you do?" I asked again, this time with a voice no longer shaking but steady and firm. "Why isn't my name on the paperwork? Why did you list yourself as the sole legal parent?" Daniel turned away, avoiding my gaze. "You don't understand, Jessica. I did what I had to do to protect the baby." I laughed, an empty, hollow laugh. Protect her? By erasing her mother from the records? You think that's the right thing to do? Daniel clenched his fists. My mom said, if you ever left, if you changed your mind, then I wouldn't have any rights to her. She was just being cautious. I could barely believe what I was hearing. So your mother told you to deceive me? So you'd have full custody if I ever walked away? He didn't answer, but the way he looked down said everything. I bit my lip until I tasted blood, gripping the blanket around me. I knew Patricia didn't like me. I knew she always wanted control, but I never imagined she'd orchestrate a legal plan to push me out of my own family. And Daniel, the man I loved, the man I trusted, went along with it. Carol, I turned to the nurse. I want to speak to someone from administration immediately. I want copies of all insurance registration, custody documents, and every form Daniel signed on my behalf. We'll do it right away. She nodded, then turned to Daniel, her voice steely. And I suggest you don't try anything reckless, because everything is being documented from this moment on. I reached for my phone, but Daniel was faster. He grabbed it from the table beside me. Jessica, you're overreacting. You're not thinking clearly. You just gave birth. You need to rest. I looked at him, calmer than I'd ever been. Give me back my phone, Daniel. No, he said, his voice hoarse. We need to talk in private. Without outsiders. There's nothing left to say in private, I replied, turning to Carol. I need to call my sister. She's the only family I have nearby. She nodded. I'll borrow the duty nurse's phone. She walked out, leaving Daniel and me in a silence so heavy it was suffocating. Daniel tried to move closer, but I pulled back. You planned this with your mother. You meant to deceive me, Daniel. How do you expect me to ever trust you again? I didn't want to lose the baby, he nearly shouted, then quickly reined himself in, realizing he'd just given everything away. I looked up at him, feeling both heartbroken and clear-eyed. You weren't afraid of losing your child. You were afraid of losing control. And you were more afraid of losing your mother than losing your wife. Right then, the door swung open. Carol walked in with a younger woman wearing a badge that read Admin Supervisor, Nicole. In their hands was a thick stack of documents. Nicole placed them on the table, opened the folder, and flipped through the pages. Per Miss Jessica's request, here is the complete documentation related to insurance and parental registration. She stopped at one page and pointed to a bolded line. Legal guardian, Daniel Weston. I could barely breathe. Nicole looked at me with sympathetic eyes. Since this is a special circumstance and you're physically present, you have every legal right to amend the records. But I'll need identity verification and your written consent. I'll do it right now, I said without a second of hesitation. And I want every change documented and signed by a witness. Daniel stepped back, his face pale. Jessica, please. This isn't what my mom meant to do to hurt you. She was just thinking about the future. It wasn't her. It was you. You're the one who signed. You're the one who erased me from being a mother. I stood up, legs still shaky from giving birth, but my voice steady as stone. I won't let this happen again. Not to me, not to my daughter. And when Carol returned with the phone, I didn't hesitate to dial. My sister, Chloe. Danielle was less than 20 minutes away from the hospital. I held the phone to my ear, my voice strangely calm. Chloe, I need you. Come to the hospital right now. It's urgent. Less than 20 minutes after the call, Chloe, my sister, burst into the hospital room, her face full of worry. As soon as she saw me, she rushed forward, wrapping her arms around my shoulders, like she was afraid I might collapse at any moment. What's going on? You sounded terrified, Chloe asked, her eyes quickly scanning from Daniel to Carol, who was standing near the bed with a guarded expression. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I handed Chloe the file Nicole had just given me, a copy of all the insurance and guardianship documents. She flipped through a few pages, her initial confusion quickly turning into fury. He removed you from the documents? You just gave birth and he dared to do this? Daniel stood near the door, arms crossed, his voice low but tense. I don't need outsiders interfering in my family's business. Chloe turned on him. Your family? This baby is my niece, and the person you're trying to push out of her life is my sister. Don't kid yourself. I looked at Daniel. I wanted to believe this was just a legal mistake, a careless arrangement. But the strange calm in his demeanor, the silence every time I asked questions, it all pointed to something much darker. Chloe stepped toward the table where Daniel had placed my phone after snatching it earlier. Next to it, his own phone was lit up, an incoming message. Whether out of instinct or suspicion, Chloe picked it up. He didn't lock it, she muttered, then glanced at me. Do you want to see who he was texting while you were giving birth? I hesitated. Chloe. But she had already opened the messages. Within seconds, her face froze. Her eyes widened, her fingers tightened around the phone. You have to see this. I took the phone, my hands trembling so much I nearly dropped it. On the screen was a conversation between Daniel and someone named Madeline. No last name, but the profile picture showed a blonde woman with a polished smile. She looked vaguely familiar. I scrolled down. The most recent message read, "Just waiting for you. She'll have nothing once the baby is born. You and your mom took care of everything." My mind went blank, my vision blurred, but I could still read every word below it. I can't believe you're finally free of her. Soon, we'll be a real family. Chloe's voice was cold and sharp. You remember Madeline, right? Karen's daughter. Your mother-in-law's best friend? The one Patricia always said was beautiful, well-mannered, and more worthy of Daniel than anyone else? I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. The pieces started falling into place. Perfectly, terrifyingly. Patricia had never liked me. She'd always tried to push me out of Daniel's life, but I never imagined she'd go so far as to find a replacement. And Daniel, the man I trusted most, willingly played the leading role in this cruel scheme. You were seeing her? I asked, my voice almost unrecognizable. Daniel didn't answer, but he didn't need to. His silence said more than any excuse ever could. I pulled the blanket tighter around myself, trying to shield against the harsh truth closing in on me. You were going to take everything from me? I whispered. My child, my right to be her mother, the life I built. Daniel leaned toward me, his voice tense. Jessica, you don't understand. You've always been too emotional, too sensitive. You were never the kind of woman my mother hoped for. Worthy? I laughed bitterly. So your solution was to betray me? And secretly prepare to leave me with nothing? Daniel clenched his fists, staring at the floor. My mom said, if you ever walked away from the family, you'd drag me down with you. She said Madeline would help me go further. She believes Madeline is a better investment. Chloe slammed the phone onto the table, her voice shaking with rage. So, family is just an investment to you? And Jessica, the woman who stood by you when you had nothing, is just a liability? I looked down at my daughter, still peacefully sleeping in my arms. My mind swirled with pain, anger, betrayal. But beneath it all was a flicker of something stronger. Resolve. I turned to Chloe. Do you still have contact with Ethan, our cousin, the lawyer? Chloe nodded. Of course. I'll call him right now. And Jess, you're not alone in this. I held my daughter tightly, then looked Daniel straight in the eye. You just lost everything, Daniel. And this time, I'm the one rewriting the rules. I was still holding my daughter in my arms as Chloe dialed Ethan, our cousin, now a family law attorney in Minneapolis. Each ring echoed like a pounding heartbeat in my chest. I couldn't believe I had once seen Daniel as my rock. The man standing in front of me now wasn't a husband. He was a stranger who had quietly laid out an entire chessboard to cut me out of my own family. As soon as Ethan answered, Chloe didn't waste a second. Ethan, it's Chloe. Jessica just gave birth, but her husband is trying to take full custody of the baby. We have documents and witnesses at the hospital. We need to act now. Ethan asked only one question. How long is she staying in the hospital? At least 2 more days, Chloe replied. Keep every document. Don't sign anything else. I'll be there in under an hour. I nodded at Chloe, but my eyes stayed locked on Daniel. He was leaning against the wall, hands in his pockets, trying to look calm, but his right foot twitched, a telltale habit when he was nervous. He knew things were out of his control. I looked back at the table. The birth certificate still lay there, stamped with Evelyn Jane Weston. The name Patricia had chosen herself, carried out by Daniel like an obedient child awaiting his mother's command. I didn't need to think twice. Cradling my daughter with one arm, I reached out with the other, grabbed the paper, and coldly tore it in half, then again into quarters. Daniel flinched. Jessica? What are you doing? Taking back my right to be a mother, I said, not blinking. You won't control me, and you definitely won't control her. The sound of tearing paper cut through the heavy air like a blade, severing the last thread of what I had once naively called family. The door swung open, and, like a scene from a script I'd seen too many times, Patricia walked in, her heels clicking sharply on the polished tile floor. She wore a cream fur coat, flawless red lipstick, and swept the room with her eyes like she was the one who'd just given birth. My body tensed instinctively. Chloe stepped closer to shield the bed, but I raised a hand to stop her. Patricia approached the foot of the bed, her gaze landing on the shredded birth certificate on the floor. She gave a half smile. I take it you've figured everything out. You knew I gave birth today, but didn't bother to ask me a single question, I said, my voice low. You only cared whether your name was printed on the birth certificate. Patricia crossed her arms. Yes, because it's what's best for the child, a name with value, history, and protection. She glanced at Daniel. As I said, you needed to stick to the plan. Daniel swallowed hard, his lips tight. The confidence he once had was gone. There were no more excuses left. I sat up straighter, holding my baby closer. So, what's your plan, Patricia? Take custody, bring her to live with you and Madeline? And me, her biological mother? Just erased from her life like I never existed? She didn't deny it. She didn't even look away. You're not the kind of woman fit to raise a child in the Weston family. Too emotional, too indecisive, lacking direction. Madeline and her mother will provide a more stable environment. I could hardly believe I was hearing those words from a woman who was educated, once a respected high school principal. And that gives you the right to override my right to be a mother? I said through clenched teeth. Patricia smirked. You only thought you had rights. Chloe stepped forward, her eyes burning. If you think you can use your influence to take custody of my niece, then you'd better prepare for a very long legal battle, and you'll lose. I looked directly at Daniel without a trace of pity. You can keep following your mother, or you can step out of her shadow and do the right thing, but remember this. I have evidence, witnesses, and a lawyer, and I'm ready to take this to court. Daniel stepped back half a pace. His eyes flicked to Patricia, as if searching for an answer, but she said nothing. The certainty in her gaze had turned into a glossy shell, starting to crack. I bent down and kissed my daughter's forehead. You'll grow up in a world where your mother never bows to injustice, no matter who stands in the way. Daniel stood frozen, fists clenched at his sides, eyes clouded like someone waking up from a long, bitter dream. I stared at him without blinking, waiting for a reaction. Anger, defiance, resistance like before? But this time, nothing came. Just silence, stretching on like a held breath. Then he exhaled, like all the air had been drained from his chest. His shoulders dropped, the hardness fading from his face. I can't do this, Daniel said, his voice low like a confession. Patricia immediately turned to him, her sharp eyes flashing with shock and fury. What did you say? She took a step toward him, her tone sharp. Do you have any idea how long we've prepared for this? How many years I endured to get you here, and now you say you can't? Daniel still didn't look at her. His eyes were on me and the baby. For the first time since she was born, his gaze didn't feel distant. Something had changed. Maybe it was too late, but it was real. "You're not the one who lives with her," Daniel said, his voice steady but weary. "I do, and I don't want to live like this anymore." "I gave up my youth for you," Patricia nearly screamed. "And now you think you can stand here and throw it all away over some foolish emotion?" Chloe raised an eyebrow. "That foolish emotion you're talking about is my sister's right to be a mother." Patricia glared at her, then turned back to Daniel, as if willing him to return to her carefully crafted path. But this time, he didn't move. He bowed his head, exhaled, and said softly, "I'm sorry, Mom, but I can't keep doing what my conscience won't allow." That was the moment I knew the game was over. Not because Daniel had suddenly become brave, but because he finally let go of the strings his mother had pulled for so long. His silence today wasn't avoidance. It was refusal. Patricia stood there for a few more seconds, her expression flickering between wounded pride and anger. Then she spun on her heel and stormed out of the room without another word. The sound of her heels on the tile floor echoed like the collapse of a crumbling empire. Daniel didn't follow her. The air in the room felt lighter, though still tense like a drawn string. Carol stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "We need to fix the paperwork today, before there's any further interference from Daniel's family." Nicole, the admin supervisor, returned with a fresh set of documents. "I've prepared a new guardianship registration. Once you sign here, Ms. Jessica, we'll update the legal records, naming you as the sole legal guardian unless a court decides otherwise." I didn't hesitate. I took the pen. My hand trembled slightly, but my heart didn't. I signed each letter carefully, as if laying the foundation of my life all over again. This time, I wasn't being led by anyone. When I set the pen down, Nicole nodded. "The records will be updated today, and all previous changes, including your husband's unilateral filing, will be voided." Chloe turned to me, gripping my hand. "You don't have to fight alone anymore." Daniel remained still, as if trying to come to terms with the consequences of his own actions. He opened his mouth but said nothing. Maybe he wanted to apologize, maybe he was just looking for a quiet way to back out. I didn't care. I lifted my daughter higher, gazing into her tiny, barely opened eyes. "No one will ever make decisions for you again," I whispered. "From now on, you'll live the life you deserve. Free, loved, and respected." The door closed softly behind us, but I knew that from this day forward, every old door had slammed shut. Ethan arrived about an hour later and immediately began working with the hospital's legal department to file a comprehensive signed and witnessed report. We had everything: proof of Daniel's falsification, messages with Madeline, Carol's testimony, a copy of the altered birth certificate, and now the new legally binding documents. There was nothing left to lose, and nothing left to fear. That day, I didn't just give birth to my daughter. I gave birth to a new version of myself. A mother who knows her worth, and a woman who will never let anyone take that away again. I left the hospital on a gray Tuesday afternoon, the Minnesota sky thick with clouds, a soft breeze rustling the bare tree branches like the whole world was shedding its old skin. I carried my daughter, little Lena, wrapped snugly in a beige fleece blanket, her tiny face nestled against my chest, her breathing steady like a gentle lullaby. Daniel didn't come with us. He didn't say goodbye, didn't leave a note or send a message. When I looked back one last time, the hospital room was empty, like everything that had happened in it was just a long, heavy dream. But my daughter was the living proof that I had made it through, and wasn't looking back. Chloe drove us home in her SUV. She had the car seat ready, the heat turned on, and a bag packed for both of us, like the big sister I knew I could count on. As the car pulled away from the hospital gates, I closed my eyes for a moment, letting go of the last traces of the prison I had once called my husband's family. 3 days later, Patricia called. First, there were missed calls, then texts. The first few were gentle. "The baby needs her paternal family." Then came the veiled threats. You should remember who raised Daniel to be successful. And finally, outright blame. You're destroying a child's future out of selfishness. I didn't answer any of them. I changed my number, blocked emails and social media. I left no cracks for Patricia to slip into the new world I was building for Lena. A world without manipulation, control, or deceit. As for Daniel, after the case fell into Ethan's hands, he went silent. I heard that a few weeks after I left the hospital, he tried to salvage things with Madeline, the secret lover during my pregnancy. But she quickly walked away when she realized Daniel no longer had status or influence. His job at the software firm was suspended after internal reports about the insurance fraud surfaced. Within a month, Daniel had lost almost everything: his job, his affair, and even his mother's support once she saw it all fall apart. I was different. I didn't lose anything. I reclaimed what was mine. I filed for divorce just 1 week after returning home. Ethan handled all the paperwork personally. Daniel didn't contest it, didn't show up at the first mediation. He probably knew that everything he did in that hospital had been documented, witnessed, and recorded. The more silent he stayed, the more he avoided an even bigger lawsuit. Life after that wasn't easy. I had many sleepless nights with Lena crying, mornings when my eyes were swollen from exhaustion. But in every tiny hug, every soft breath as she napped on my chest, I felt a peace I had never known before. I returned to part-time work from home, taking small freelance projects in financial analysis, my field of study. Chloe helped care for Lena on weekends, and Ethan provided legal support whenever I needed it. I wasn't alone. And most importantly, I was no longer under anyone's control. I wasn't looking for revenge. I didn't need Daniel or Patricia to pay for what they'd done. The truth was, they brought that ending upon themselves, with poor choices, by valuing power and pride over love. I didn't win with cruelty. I won by protecting my daughter from a future controlled by people who didn't deserve her. And above all, I reclaimed freedom, for her and for myself. One early spring morning, I took Lena to the park near our home. Soft sunlight fell across her fine hair, and her eyes opened wide, seeing the world for the first time with a pure, untainted gaze. I sat down on a wooden bench, held her close to my chest, and whispered, "This is where we begin again, Lena. Just us. And I promise, no one will ever take you from me again." She didn't respond, of course, but I saw her smile as if she understood everything, and I smiled too, light as the breeze. Not because I'd forgotten what had happened, but because I had moved beyond it. Through my own story, I realized not everyone who carries the title family stands for protection and love. Some use it as a weapon to control, to violate freedom and dignity. But when you dare to stand up, to defend your voice and your right to be a mother, you don't just save yourself, you give your child a future free from manipulation. Sometimes, freedom begins with the courage to say, enough. What do you think about Jessica's story and the choice she made? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more emotional stories and powerful life lessons about family. I woke up in the middle of the night to the shrill ring of my phone, shattering the silence in my tiny Notting Hill apartment. 3:12 a.m. My heart pounded when I saw the caller ID. Savannah? My sister never called at this hour. Madison? Sis? Her voice trembled, choked, like she was holding back panic. It's Dad. He had a heart attack, a serious one. They rushed him to St. Luke's over an hour ago. The doctor said he might not make it. I froze. Is he conscious? Did they say anything else? I asked, switching on the light and reaching for my coat. Savannah sniffled through the phone. They're not sure, but before he passed out, he asked for you. He wanted to see you, Madison. I don't remember hanging up. My body acted on instinct. I threw clothes into a suitcase, opened my laptop, and tried to book a flight. My hands were shaking so badly I had to re-enter my details 3 times. economy was sold out. I picked a one-way business class ticket to New York. The cost nearly wiped out what I'd saved over the past 2 years, but I couldn't care less. My father, the man who stood in the crowd cheering me on at my first fashion show, the one who forced me to eat breakfast every morning just to sigh and say, "Fashion's a hobby, not a career," was now lying in a hospital bed calling my name with what could be his last breath. I had to go. I left behind my sketches for the spring collection, set to debut at London Fashion Week. I'd spent 3 years here, clawing my way up in this ruthless industry, building trust, connections, and now, with one call, I was about to risk everything. I stopped by the studio at 6 a.m. to speak with Karina, our creative director, the woman who had pulled me back from quitting more than once. She was reviewing some crystal-embellished gowns when she looked up and frowned at the suitcase in my hand. "What's going on, Madison?" I struggled to speak. "My dad, he had a heart attack. I need to fly to New York right away." Karina put down her pen and was silent for a few seconds. Then she said slowly, "Madison, the collection launches in less than a week. You're the lead. If you leave now—" "I know," I interrupted, my eyes stinging. "I could lose everything." Karina studied me for a long moment, then sighed. "Family is family, but time won't wait for you." I nodded, trying not to cry. "Thank you for everything." I left the studio with a weight in my chest. While waiting at Heathrow, I had tried calling the hospital. Every time I did, they told me no patient named Douglas Harper had been admitted. I blamed it on confusion, a mix-up, or maybe they'd transferred him. During the 8-hour flight, I couldn't sleep. My mind spun. Would I make it in time? Would he still be awake? Had I wasted too many years running from my family to realize what mattered? When the plane landed at JFK, it was still dark. I turned on my phone, hoping for a message from Savannah. All I got was, "Are you here yet? Eric is at the gate." Eric, my cousin, the one who almost came to blows with Dad over a business dispute. As I stepped out of baggage claim, I saw him waiting, solemn-faced. No tears, no urgency. I rushed to him. "Eric, how's Dad? Where is he?" He blinked and said slowly, "Well, there are a few things you should know." I stopped cold. A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" "Don't be vague, Eric." He avoided my gaze. "Let's talk in the car." "Mom wants you to rest at home before going to the hospital." I stared him down. "No. I want to go to the hospital, right now." Eric looked uneasy. "Madison, you need to stay calm." I didn't listen. I couldn't. Each step toward the parking lot felt heavier. If Dad was really critical, washing my face or grabbing a snack couldn't possibly be the priority. We rode in silence to St. Luke's. Outside the window, Manhattan was still asleep under the gray dawn. Inside the car, the air was thick. Eric said nothing more. I stared at my phone, heart sinking with every missed call from Savannah. When we reached the hospital, I opened the door before the car even stopped. I marched into the ER lobby and straight to the front desk. "Excuse me, I'm looking for a patient?" "Douglas Harper? He was brought in last night with a heart attack. I'm his daughter." The nurse frowned and started typing. "Can you repeat the name?" "Douglas Harper. Around 1 a.m. "I'm Madison Harper, his daughter." She kept typing. Time felt frozen. I could hear my own heartbeat. "I'm sorry," she said gently but firmly. "No one by that name has been admitted in the past 48 hours. I blinked. "Can you check again? Maybe he was transferred to another department? Cardiology?" She turned to another nurse, exchanged a few words, got a shake of the head. Then she looked back at me. "I'm certain. There is no Douglas Harper here. Not an ER, not in inpatient records." I stepped back. As if the floor had cracked open beneath me, I turned to Eric, who stood a few feet away, avoiding my eyes. "Eric," I said through clenched teeth. Explain. Where is my father? He stepped forward, voice low, trying to sound calm. Madison? Maybe it's a system error. Or he was moved to a private clinic. Mom thought it'd be better for you to come home first. I shook my head. I'm not leaving until I know exactly where he is. Eric reached for my elbow, but I pulled away. Don't touch me unless you're going to tell me the truth. His eyes darted. Then he sighed. Okay, the truth is, he's not here. He didn't have a heart attack. It was just a minor scare, nothing serious. My body felt like it crumpled inside. What? Are you saying? Let me explain. Eric rushed in. We just wanted you back. The family needs you. There are some things we couldn't discuss over the phone. I backed away completely, flooded with a storm of emotion, shock, rage, betrayal. I couldn't believe they'd made up such a story, played with my emotions, preyed on my deepest fear of losing him. Do you realize what I gave up? I said, my voice shaking with fury, not weakness. I walked away from my career, from my future. I thought my father was dying. Eric stayed silent, eyes fixed on the tiled floor, shoulders slack. I stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked out of the hospital, heart pounding with fury, not just because they lied, but because I knew one thing for sure. They wanted me back. And whatever the reason was, it wasn't simple. On the way home, I texted Savannah. Dad's fine. What about you? Did you know about this from the start? No reply. The car slowly turned onto the old street where my childhood home sat nestled among maple trees. Everything looked strangely peaceful, but I knew behind that door, a performance was already underway. When I stepped into the foyer, the first thing I saw was my mother, wearing a silk coat, her face perfectly made up, as if she were headed to a gala, not coming off a sleepless night worrying about her husband. Madison, she smiled as though nothing had happened. You're finally home. Everyone's in the dining room. I stood, frozen. A chill crept down my spine. I was back, but not for love. I had just walked straight into a carefully crafted trap. The house was thick with the scent of peonies, the perfume my mother used only on special occasions, usually lavish family gatherings. But today there was no party, no guests, just family. And a setup I couldn't yet see. She led me into the dining room, where the table was so absurdly prepared it felt theatrical. Hand-embroidered tablecloth, the fine Wedgwood china reserved for Thanksgiving, and in the center, a plate of almond waffles. My childhood favorite, though I'd stopped eating them when I was 19. Sit down, sweetheart, my mother said, patting my shoulder. You must be tired after such a long flight. I didn't answer. I glanced across the table where my father sat, holding a cup of hot tea like everything was fine. The man I'd believed was on the verge of death now looked healthier than ever. Rosy complexion, clean-shaven, sharp eyes still full of that cold, calculated confidence. Dad, I said, trying to stay calm. I'm really glad to see you well. Truly. He set his cup down and leaned forward, eyes locked on mine. Madison, I know you're angry, but let's speak as a family. We need you. All of us need you. I looked around. Besides my mother and father, Eric, the one who had picked me up, was there, and so was Savannah, my sister, her head bowed, avoiding my gaze. The room felt like a closed courtroom, and I knew I was on trial. Fine, I said, taking a seat. Then let's be honest. Why did you fake a heart attack just to get me here? Don't tell me it was just family love. My father chuckled softly. You've always been direct. No, not just love. It's about an opportunity. A future you could help preserve. I stared at him. An opportunity? You mean Grandpa's inheritance? My mother stiffened. Eric looked away. Savannah raised her teary eyes. We weren't going to keep it from you much longer, my mother rushed to say. But you know, your 30th birthday is in less than a month, and according to the will, you'll receive the entire amount. 8 million, I interrupted. $8,300,000, including the investment portfolio and the Vermont property. Silence. You knew? My mother asked, stunned. Of course, I replied coolly. Grandpa was the only one who ever respected my choices. He told me everything before he passed. That I'd get my share when I turned 30, with one condition. I stay out of the family business. My father's face darkened. A ridiculous condition. No, I said. He knew exactly what this family would try to do without protection. Eric stood abruptly. You can't just stand by while your family collapses. Where do you think that money came from? From our parents' blood and sweat over 40 years. Blood and sweat? I snapped. Or shady investment loans? Unfinished construction contracts? Or the investors you all made promises to and then disappeared on? Madison, that's enough, my father said firmly. This isn't an interrogation. We just want you to join the company. As a partner. As family. I leaned in, eyes locked on his. Not a partner. You want me to transfer all the money into Walker Holdings to cover your losses. And what do I get in return? A powerless seat on the board? An empty promise that we'll stick together? Savannah broke down. I'm sorry, sis. I didn't know they'd do this. I thought it was a joke, a way to bring you home. I didn't think. I looked at her, my heart softening for a moment. But then I turned to my father. You might think I'm the irresponsible daughter chasing a silly dream, but at least I don't deceive people who trust me. And I won't let Grandpa's money be used to cover your mess. My father stood, fists clenched, but his voice stayed even. Madison, if you walk away, the consequences won't just be financial. Are you ready to handle that? I drew a deep breath, feeling the tension that had clung to my shoulders since London. I've lost a lot just by coming back, I said slowly. But if I have to lose more to do what's right, I will. And this time, I'll be the one holding the cards. The room fell silent. I stood up, pulled out my phone and looked him straight in the eye. Now. We're playing by my rules. I walked back to my old bedroom in silence, closing the door behind me, like shutting out every lingering sound from downstairs. Everything was just as I'd left it. The faded seagull wallpaper, the old oak bookshelf, and the desk where I once sketched my first designs using HB pencils borrowed from Savannah's crayon box. I sat on the edge of the bed, gripping my phone. My heart raced, not from fear, but from memory. The years of being the family's thorn came rushing back like an undertow. Quiet, but all-consuming. It was never the daughter they wanted. When I got into Parsons School of Design, Dad didn't even show up for my first showcase. Design is frivolous, he once said over a cold dinner. You should study asset management, like Eric. Practical, stable, valuable. That line haunted me for years, not because he disapproved, but because he never once asked what I wanted. I was born to inherit an empire, whether I liked it or not, and when I chose a different path, they didn't see bravery, they saw betrayal. Mom was subtler. She didn't voice disapproval directly, but on the day I launched my first collection, she sent me an email. No congratulations. Just a link to an article, High Unemployment Rates in Fashion Industry Post-Pandemic. I remember deleting it without finishing. They never wanted me to be a designer. They wanted me to be part of Walker Legacy, the name plastered on every real estate banner in the region, from the upscale Riverstone apartments to the suburban malls in Fairfield. They wanted me in a blazer, in a boardroom, signing contracts and nodding along. But I chose fabric over finance, the runway over spreadsheets. I chose to build my world, not color in theirs. And they've never forgiven me for it. My phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. Be careful what they're hiding, trust no one but yourself. I stared at the screen. No name, no signature. but I had a distinct feeling that someone in the shadows was watching, and maybe trying to help. I saved the number without replying, then stood and opened the old wooden wardrobe. I pulled out the bottom drawer, where I kept a worn sea blue tin box. Inside were scraps I once hid from my parents. My first wedding dress sketch at 16, the acceptance letter from Parsons, a photo from my first dress rehearsal in London, and a letter, a faded envelope with firm handwriting, to Madison, from Grandpa. I'd nearly forgotten it. He gave me the letter during our final visit at the care home in Vermont, where he spent his final years after stepping away from the company just to breathe clean air one last time before I go. I opened it, heart pounding. Madison, if you're reading this letter, chances are you've been pulled into something I always feared might happen. I can't stop our family from making mistakes, but I can protect a piece of your freedom. That's why I set up the inheritance the way I did. You're the only one in our bloodline brave enough to say no. Don't lose that. And if anyone tries to control you, remember, blood is not a chain. Integrity is what you must hold on to. I always believed in you. Grandpa Calvin. I sat, frozen. The letter wasn't just advice. It was a map. He knew. Years ago, he saw this coming. That one day, they'd try to take back everything I once walked away from. A soft knock at the door. I tucked the letter away and turned to see Savannah standing in the doorway, eyes red and swollen. Medicine. I didn't know it would turn out like this. They said if you just came back, things would be worked out. I crossed my arms, leaning against the wardrobe. Worked out by making me hand over the inheritance? Savannah lowered her head. I overheard them last night. They planned to list you as an investment trustee, but Dad and Eric would retain full control. I took a deep breath. Thanks for telling me. She stepped closer and whispered, there's one more thing. I saw Bernard, the family lawyer, here a few times recently. They said it was for consultation, but I think something's off. I overheard him on the phone. He mentioned moving the funds before your birthday. Against the will's terms. It clicked. They had no intention of waiting for my consent. They were planning a workaround. I left the house the next morning before anyone woke up. The sky hadn't lightened yet, and fog still draped over the maple trees lining the familiar white fence. But I wasn't in a nostalgic mood. I only knew I needed the truth, and I would find it, no matter who tried to hide it. I headed straight to the little coffee shop on Cortlandt Street where I'd worked part-time in high school. Irene, the owner, still remembered me. Madison Harper. My, you look like someone out of a fashion magazine. She chuckled, handing me a latte. What brings you back? I heard your dad had a heart attack. I sipped. There was no heart attack, Irene. Just a fake phone call to drag me home. Her face paled. She lowered her voice, leaning across the counter. Madison, if you really want to know what's going on, talk to Kent. He used to do the books for your dad's company, but he left a few months ago, for personal reasons. The name Kent made my stomach twist. I remembered meeting him at a few of the company's Christmas parties. Quiet, have his number? She nodded, pulling out a faded scrap of paper from the drawer. I thanked her, left the shop, and called immediately. We met at a bakery near the train station. Kent showed up right on time, wearing a checkered shirt and black-rimmed glasses. Still the same accountant, but his eyes looked tired. Wary. Madison, he nodded. I assume you want to know the real state of Walker Holdings. I nodded. I know they're trying to use my inheritance. What I don't know is why they're that desperate. Kent sighed, pulled out his phone and opened a series of spreadsheets. The company expanded too fast in the past 2 years. Gateway Plaza was stalled due to permit issues. Meadowline Estates got sued over structural faults. What's left are loans from unconventional sources. I frowned. Unconventional how? Private investors, off the books, some tied to shell companies. High interest terms, vague clauses. If they miss repayment, the consequences won't just be financial. I sat up. You mean criminal risk? Madison? Kent said slowly. Walker Holdings is running like a Ponzi scheme. They're using new investor money to pay old investor returns. There's no actual profit from projects. Most are stalled, or worse, frozen. A chill ran through me. It was all clear now. They didn't just need my money to save the company. They needed me to cover a crumbling con. And if I don't sign over the inheritance, they can't touch the money, Kent confirmed. I've seen a copy of your grandfather's trust clause. It's airtight. You're the only one authorized to release funds, but... He hesitated. I know Bernard, the lawyer, is working on a back door. They're pressuring you to voluntarily invest, but if that fails, they might forge your signature. Or worse, declare you legally unfit to manage your assets. My breath caught. They'd go that far? Madison, they already faked a heart attack. Nothing's too far anymore. I left the bakery with a weight in my chest. Each step on the sidewalk felt like I was walking across the cracking foundation of my family. Dad, the same man who once carried me home after I crashed my bike at 7, was now plotting to steal my future to preserve his perfect businessman mask. Mom, the one who used to brush my hair before every high school presentation, now sat across from a lawyer, plotting how to force my hand. And Eric, my brother, when did he become the man knocking on my door at night, asking for a signature? I pulled out my phone and messaged the one person I could still trust, Julian, my ex now a state-level financial crimes investigator. I need to meet. It's about investment fraud and asset transfers. Urgent. I didn't know exactly what I was stepping into, but one thing was certain. This wasn't just a family matter anymore. This was large-scale fraud. I met Julian that afternoon at a discreet cafe in Stamford, far from town and even farther from anyone tied to my family. He was the same Farah, calm, sharp, amber eyes hard to read. Long time, he said, pulling out an earbud and closing his laptop. I'm guessing this isn't just a coffee and catch-up situation. I sat down, straight to the point. I need help, and I need to know I can trust you. Julian tilted his head. If you're asking, it means you don't trust anyone else. So tell me. From the beginning? I told him everything. The midnight call, the empty hospital, the staged dinner, the numbers Kent showed me. I held nothing back. If I wanted him in, he needed the full puzzle. He listened quietly the whole time, nodding occasionally, asking the right questions. When I finished, he looked at me steadily. Do you have any physical evidence yet? Emails, documents, calls, contracts, meeting minutes? Not yet. But I have a plan, I said. I'll get into the company's internal system using Savannah's sub-account. She has access to financial reports. Kent still has old files. I just need to know. If I get enough, can you take it to the right people? Julian nodded. State Finance Department, Securities Commission, and the Attorney General's office. If what you're saying is true, and I believe it is, this isn't just fraud. This is a federal crime. And if they try to force me to sign before my birthday, don't sign anything. I'll get a lawyer involved, Julian said. What about your grandfather? Did he have a lawyer before he passed? Yes. His name was Joseph Reed. He was Grandpa's close friend, specialized in estate law. Julian jotted it down. Find him. If he set up the trust, he'll know every clause and how to block any illegal transfer. That night, when I returned home, I slipped into character. I smiled politely at dinner, asked Dad about the new development project, feigned interest in the suburban expansion he bragged about. My mother watched me with an expression that said she wasn't sure whether to believe in this calm or brace for a storm. I pretended to be tired and asked to turn in early, but really I was waiting. At 11 p.m., I knocked softly on Savannah's door. She startled when she saw me, but opened the door. "Your account still has access to Walker Holdings' internal network, right?" Savannah hesitated. "What are you planning to do?" "Find the truth. If you really want to be on the right side." She sighed and nodded. "I can let you in, but only tonight. IT's updating the access system tomorrow." I borrowed Savannah's laptop and logged into the system using her credentials. Internal folders appeared, hundreds of files. But I knew exactly what I needed: balance sheets, investment records, and most importantly, loan contracts with suspicious clauses. I downloaded everything onto an external drive and took screenshots of any irregularities. Some contracts contained vague provisions, many with consulting advance payments sent to untraceable accounts. There was even a payroll sheet for development advisors I'd never heard of. And then, a hidden folder labeled Archangel Funding. When I opened it, I couldn't believe what I saw. A loan contract with an investment firm in the Bahamas, 18% interest, full repayment required within 90 days, signed under the name Madison Harper with a forged signature. Below it, a scanned copy of my passport, also fake. I looked at Savannah. Her face had gone pale. You didn't sign these, right?" "Of course not." I quickly copied everything and encrypted the drive, then sent a backup to Julian that same night. When I closed the laptop, my heart was pounding, not from fear of being caught, but because I knew I was closer than ever to the eye of the storm. The next morning, Julian called. "I've gone through everything. We have enough to begin the investigation. But Madison, you need to be careful. If they realize what you've got, they won't hide anymore." 3 days later, I walked into the office of Joseph Reed, my grandfather's estate attorney, inside a historic building in New Haven's Old Quarter. He was over 70, silver-haired, with sharp eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. He recognized me immediately. "Madison Harper, I was hoping you'd come ever since Calvin passed." I nodded and handed him the drive. "I need you to verify the legal integrity of every clause in Calvin's inheritance trust. And I need to know, can they fake anything to transfer the assets?" Joseph spent nearly an hour reviewing everything, including the documents Kent had compiled, the fake contracts, and the Archangel funding folder. When he looked up, his expression was serious. "They're dangerously close to the line, and some have already crossed it," he said. "You did the right thing by not signing anything. If you had, all protections would have been void. So what do I do now?" "You're going to do exactly what Calvin intended," Joseph replied, pulling a thick folder from his drawer. "This is a formal petition from the beneficiary, requesting a civil and criminal investigation for violations of the trust, financial fraud, and document forgery. I've kept it for over 3 years, waiting for the day you were ready to sign." I picked up the pen without hesitation. Today is that day. Less than a week later, Julian informed me. The SEC had received the initial file, along with evidence from Joseph and Kent's financial analysis. The case was then referred to the FBI office in Connecticut, and the State Department of Justice was notified to expand the investigation into potential money laundering and investment fraud. On the morning the investigation officially began, I saw them through the window. 3 unmarked black SUVs quietly parked at the front gate. 2 men in navy suits stepped out, flashing badges to my mother, who was watering flowers. I came downstairs as a low hum of panic buzzed through the house. "What's going on?" my father asked, emerging from his study. His face went stiff at the sight of the badge on the lead agent's jacket. "Mr. Douglas Harper," the man said firmly. "I'm Agent Montgomery with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have a warrant to search all properties owned by Walker Holdings in connection to allegations of investment fraud and misuse of real estate development funds." My father froze. My mother dropped the watering can, hands trembling. "There must be a mistake." "There's no mistake, Mrs. Harper," the second agent said, opening the warrant. "We've received reports from the beneficiary of the Calvin Harper Trust, along with financial documents indicating fund abuse, forged contracts, and overseas money transfers." "It's her, isn't it?" Eric shouted, just arriving. He pointed at me. "Madison did this." I faced him head on. "No, you did. When you forged my signature. When you agreed to take money from illegal investors. I'm just the one stopping it from going any further." "My daughter. Turning on her own family?" my father murmured, shaking his head. "You think this is right? You think destroying us will make you proud?" I held his gaze. "I didn't destroy anyone. Your choices brought us here. I'm just making sure you don't drag Grandpa's name through the mud to cover your mistakes." In the weeks that followed, the investigation spread wider than I ever imagined. The SEC issued an asset freeze against Walker Holdings and moved to seal all accounts linked to Bernard. The family lawyer, who was now under suspicion for document forgery, Julianne, helped me work with the state legal team to ensure my rights as the lawful beneficiary. Complaints poured in from investors, some of whom had been family friends, people I once called uncle or aunt, now looking at me with both sadness and gratitude. I created a heavily secured online archive to store all evidence, emails, and recorded calls. Connecticut is a one-party consent state, and I took full advantage, recording every recent conversation with my father, Eric, and Bernard. Every time they mentioned a backup plan or forcing Madison into a contract, I captured every word. Life in the house felt like walking on thin ice. No one spoke loudly, no one made eye contact. I spent my days quietly observing, counting the hours until the truth came to light. 3 months after the warrant was executed, the first trial began at the Fairfield District Court. Outside, press crowded the gates, cameras pointed at the once prestigious estate, now the center of Connecticut's largest financial scandal in over a decade. I sat in the back row with Julian and Joseph Reed, my partners, through every legal step. On the defendant's bench sat my father in a beige prison jumpsuit, wrists cuffed, his expression still clinging to pride. My mother, pale, hair neatly pinned but visibly hollow, sat silently beside him. Eric was different. He couldn't hide his agitation, occasionally glancing back at me like he wanted to blame me for everything. Savannah wasn't in court that day. After voluntarily giving a statement and providing proof that she was coerced into assisting through her account access, she was granted immunity. But I knew choosing truth had cost her family's trust. The prosecutor laid out the charges: financial fraud, money laundering, misuse of investment funds, and forgery of estate documents. One by one, the evidence was presented. Internal emails, illegal loan agreements, financial data restored by Kent, and most importantly, the forged documents with my signature, along with the recordings I had secretly made. My father stayed mostly silent, speaking only when directly addressed. My mother cried as the prosecutor read aloud emails she had sent to Bernard, where she wrote about softening Madison up through emotional pressure. Eric lost it on the third day, slamming the table mid-hearing and getting escorted out of the courtroom temporarily. But the biggest surprise came from Bernard, the family attorney who once seemed so polished at Christmas parties. Faced with undeniable evidence, he chose to cooperate with the authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence. In his testimony, he revealed everything: how he helped Eric set up shell companies, how my father transferred money into offshore investment funds in the Caribbean, and how my mother used a charitable foundation to launder funds. The trial lasted 5 weeks. On sentencing day, the courtroom was completely still. The judge delivered the verdict, his voice firm and resolute. Douglas Harper, as the mastermind, was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, with no chance of early release, along with a civil penalty exceeding $5 million. Rachel Harper, my mother, received a 5-year suspended sentence with supervision due to limited cooperation and not directly managing the funds, though she benefited from them. Eric Harper, my brother, was sentenced to 12 years in prison on charges of fraud and forgery. Bernard had his law license permanently revoked, received a 4-year prison sentence, and was ordered to compensate victims using all of his personal assets. I didn't feel triumphant, I just felt relieved. Justice, delayed as it was, had finally arrived. In the courthouse hallway, some of the defrauded investors began approaching me. An elderly woman with silver hair took my hand, her voice trembling. "You saved us," she said, tears spilling over. "We won't recover everything, but at least the truth didn't stay buried." I nodded, speechless. That afternoon, I returned to the old house, now partially sealed off for asset investigation. I stood at the window of my childhood room, looking out into the yard. The same maple tree was still there, rustling in the autumn breeze, but the Madison who once stood beneath it, dreaming of belonging, no longer existed. I got into the car where Julian was waiting. He looked at me but didn't ask anything. We simply drove away from that old road, carrying with us a chapter that had finally closed. Painful, but necessary. A week later, I received a handwritten letter from Savannah. Her handwriting was shaky. "Dear Madison, I know we've lost a lot to do what's right, but I believe you did what no one else had the courage to do. I'm starting over, and if you'll allow me, I hope one day we can start over together. Savannah." I folded the letter and placed it beside the files for the victim support fund that Joseph and I were setting up. A portion of my inheritance would go toward compensating those who'd been deceived. Not out of obligation, but because it was the right thing to do. Eventually, I looked in the mirror of my new apartment in New York, a space where I was building a different life. The woman staring back wasn't the overlooked daughter anymore. The following spring, I officially completed the legal conversion of Walker Holdings' remaining assets into a new entity, the Harper Foundation for Ethical Development, a nonprofit dedicated to rebuilding communities harmed by abandoned projects, shady investments, and especially the fallout caused by my own family's company. What used to be my father's executive office on the 5th floor of the Central Stamford building was now a light-filled collaborative space covered in community planning maps, affordable housing blueprints, and restoration project timelines. I kept the old oak desk, but removed every symbol of past power. No gold plaques, no photos of my father shaking hands with politicians. Just one frame remained. My grandfather, Calvin Harper, smiling by the wooden window of his old house in Vermont. In the picture of his hand, with support from Joseph Reed and a team of young lawyers from Columbia, I established the Community Restitution Fund using more than 60% of my remaining inheritance. Those defrauded by Walker Holdings, from retirees who lost pensions to unpaid contractors, were invited to submit claims. Within 3 months, we approved over 120 cases, offering compensation for up to 70% of their original losses. Julian helped me connect with federal agencies and Connecticut's state government to secure additional funding, turning the Harper Foundation into a pilot model for other states focused on post-fraud economic recovery. Savannah, after undergoing therapy and cutting ties with Eric, became the foundation's director of communications. No one expected the girl who once helped stage The Lie to become the voice behind speeches that moved hearts and told the stories of those hurt by greed. A day, during a project meeting for the Affordable Housing Initiative in Bridgeport, I received a small package. Inside was an old wedding dress sketch, the original one I had drawn at 17 and thought I had lost. Alongside it was a handwritten note. "This belongs to you. Keep creating something beautiful. Mom." I didn't know who she had asked to send it. After the trial, my mother served her probation quietly in a small town in Maine. We hadn't spoken since, but that sketch, with faded lines still intact, tightened something in my chest. Maybe in the rubble of everything that had broken, small pieces of forgiveness still remained. Not enough to rebuild, but enough to soften. Every week, I spent one afternoon with a group of high school students in the first relocation complex we had finished. The kids called me Model Madison because I used to work in fashion. They loved telling me about their redesigns of the world. A bridge that lights up when someone feels sad. A hanging park between two old buildings. A library that only opens at night for insomniacs seeking peace. And I listened. Not to spark inspiration for a new collection, but to remember why I started this journey. Not to prove myself to anyone, but to build a place where no one is left behind because of someone else's mistakes. I also started writing. Essays about justice, trust, and how a woman, once seen as the family rebel, could rebuild the moral foundation of an entire community. My pieces were published in outlets like Forbes, Harvard Ethics Review, and even Vogue. I remember when the Vogue editor reached out. We want to feature you not just because of fashion, but because you've redefined what elegance means, from fabric to social responsibility. 3 years later, I stood in front of the new headquarters of the Harper Foundation, a building repurposed from one of Walker Holdings' abandoned projects, now home to a vocational center, a community library, and an entrepreneurship hub for young women. I cut the ribbon, to applause not from elites, but from people who had once lost everything and were now beginning again. I looked up at the sign. Rebuilding isn't just about building back. It's about building right from the start. One October afternoon, I visited the Women's Correctional Facility in York, Connecticut. My mother had agreed to serve an 18-month sentence after being discovered assisting my father in hiding illicit funds. She had been transferred there over 6 months ago, but this was the first time I had requested a visit. The visitation room wasn't what I expected. No thick bars or gray walls, just a simple space with plastic chairs and quiet doors, dim yellow light falling from round ceiling fixtures. My mother entered in a light blue uniform, her hair neatly tied, her face still composed, but visibly hardened. She paused when she saw me, then sat down across from me, maintaining a careful distance. "Madison," she said softly, as if afraid her voice might shatter the fragile air between us. I nodded. "I got the wedding sketch you sent." She looked up, her eyes flickering. "I didn't know you still had it." "I almost threw it away," I said, gently but honestly. But then I thought, if you held on to it all these years, there must have been a reason. She sighed. At first, it was out of anger. Then regret. Eventually, I kept it as something I could never say out loud. What was that? That I was wrong to want you to become someone you weren't. I was quiet. That sentence, though years too late, hit a place deep inside me, where I had once wondered if she ever truly saw me. I always thought protecting the family's image was the most important thing, she continued. I was raised in a world where mistakes weren't allowed to show. But I never imagined I would be the one making the biggest mistake with my own daughter. I didn't know what to say. The fury that once burned in my chest now felt like ashes. No longer hot, but not yet cold. I just asked, very softly, "Why didn't you speak up when Dad and Eric planned to forge my signature?" She bowed her head. I was afraid. If I said something, they'd cut me out. I know that doesn't excuse my silence, but at the very least, I sent that sketch as a way to say, I still remember who you were before I tried to make you someone else. I clenched my hands and slowly released them. I don't know if we'll ever be mother and daughter again, but I think we can start by listening. She nodded. That's all I hope for. On my 33rd birthday, I didn't throw a party. Instead, I returned to Vermont, where my grandfather once lived. I lit a candle in front of the old house, now a shelter for women facing financial hardship. As the wind rustled softly through the trees, I imagined hearing his voice. My stubborn girl finally found her way. I smiled, saying nothing. Back from Vermont, I received an invitation to speak at an international conference on business ethics in Berlin. They wanted me to share my story, not as a family scandal, but as a case study of someone brave enough to challenge a broken system. even when it was built by those closest to her. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't a public speaker, and I didn't enjoy exposing old scars to strangers. But then I realized, if my story could help even one person find courage in their darkest moment, it was worth telling. Standing before a warmly lit hall filled with hundreds of eyes, I didn't begin with fancy terminology or complex graphs. I started with a simple sentence. Sometimes, you have to choose between protecting your family's reputation or protecting your own conscience. I spoke about the 3 a.m. phone call, the fake heart attack, the collapse of trust, and the unbearable loneliness of realizing the people who should have protected me were the ones who hurt me most. I didn't share to accuse, but to make clear, silence does more damage than the truth ever will. Afterward, a middle-aged woman approached me. She was the director of a fund supporting victims of familial financial abuse. "You're not alone," she said, holding my hand. "Your voice speaks for thousands who aren't yet strong enough to use theirs." I once believed blood was sacred, unbreakable, that family, even when wrong, should be forgiven. But I've learned a painful truth. Betrayal from loved ones isn't lighter. It's heavier precisely because it comes from those we once thought safest. Family isn't built on DNA. It's built on choice, on choosing love, respect, and honesty each day. I chose what was right, even at the cost of what once felt irreplaceable. I lost my father, my brother, and the image of a mother I once longed to impress. But I gained a new family, honest colleagues, communities rebuilt from ashes, and a sister who once strayed, but now helps me shape the future. One late afternoon, standing on the Harper Foundation rooftop as we installed solar panels for the next expansion, Savannah came beside me holding 2 cups of hot cocoa. "Do you think Dad ever regretted it?" she asked, her voice as light as the breeze. I looked out at the blazing red sunset, then answered after a pause. "I'm not sure, but I think if he did, it came too late for it to matter." Savannah nodded, her gaze heavy but no longer lost. She had stepped out of that shadow, and so had I. None of us are perfect, but we all have the chance to choose again. I kept writing. My essays were included in university curricula on ethical leadership. I served as an honorary judge for a startup competition for young Black entrepreneurs. I received letters from people I'd never met, telling me how my story gave them the courage to escape control, deception, or emotional abuse from their own families. And one quiet evening, when a teenage girl from Chicago wrote to tell me she had refused to sign an unfair inheritance contract because Madison did it too, I understood. My journey was never just about me. It was a reminder that doing what's right is rarely easy, but always worth it. And if I have to stand alone to defend it, I will. Proudly, calmly, and without regret. Madison's story is a powerful reminder that blood cannot justify betrayal. When faced with deception from those she once trusted most, she chose what was right, even at great personal cost. In a world full of compromise, she reminds us that integrity never goes out of style. Standing up, saying no to wrongdoing, that's not just courage, it's how we reclaim our worth. And sometimes, standing alone is the only way not to fall. What do you think of Madison's choice? Would you have the same courage if it were you? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful family stories.